They thought I was finished. They sat in my living room, the room my wife had decorated with her own hands, piece by piece. Over 40 years of marriage, and they spoke about me like I wasn't there, like I was already gone. That was the moment I knew everything had changed. And honestly, if I'm being truthful with you, it was the moment I stopped being afraid. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start at the beginning, because the beginning is the only place that makes sense of everything that came after. My wife Carol and I got married in the summer of 1981. I was 24 years old, working at a machine parts company in Nashville, Tennessee, and she was 22, fresh out of community college with a bookkeeping certificate and a smile that made me forget my own name. We were not wealthy people. We were not connected people. We were just two kids from working families who decided to build something together, brick by brick, year by year, with no safety net and no guarantees. For 41 years, that's exactly what we did. We bought a house on Clover Hill Road in 1988, a 3-bedroom colonial with a leaky basement and a backyard full of overgrown honeysuckle. Carol cried when we signed the papers, not from sadness, from relief, she told me later. She said she had never in her life owned anything that truly belonged to her, and now she did. Now we did. We raised 2 children in that house. Our son Derek came first, in 1984. Our daughter Patrice followed 3 years later. I worked long hours at the plant. I worked long hours. Carol kept the books for a small dental office downtown and managed our household with a precision that still astonishes me when I think about it. She knew exactly where every dollar went. She clipped coupons, meal planned on Sunday afternoons, and kept a spiral notebook where she tracked our monthly expenses down to the last cent. People who didn't know her well thought she was frugal to the point of being cheap. I knew better. Carol wasn't tight with money out of fear. She was disciplined with money out of vision. She always said, "Raymond, the day will come when we won't have to count anymore. But that day doesn't just arrive on its own. You have to build it." I believed her. I just didn't know how literally she meant it. For the last 23 years of our marriage, my wife drove to the East Side branch of First Commerce Bank on the second Tuesday of every month. Without fail. Rain, snow, summer heat, she went. I knew she went. She never hid it from me. When I asked her about it early on, maybe in 2001 or 2002, she said she was managing a small savings account she had set up before we met, something from her mother's estate that she preferred to handle separately. She was not secretive about it. She said it plainly and moved on, and I trusted her completely. So I moved on too. I never asked again. That was my nature. That was our marriage. There were rooms in Carol's interior life that she kept tended and private, not from dishonesty but from self-possession. And I respected that. She respected the same in me. 41 years, and we never once had to tear each other down to feel tall. She was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer in March of last year. By August, she was gone. I won't spend long on those months, because the grief belongs to me and I hold it close. What I will tell you is that Carol faced what was coming with the same quiet strength she had brought to everything else. She was not dramatic about it. She settled her affairs, said what needed saying to the people she loved, and she left this world on a Wednesday morning in late August, with her hand in mine and a look on her face that I can only describe as finished, not defeated, but completed, like a sentence that had found its final word. The funeral was on a Saturday. Both of my children were there, of course, along with Derek's wife Sandra and Patrice's husband Glenn. There were friends from church, neighbors, former colleagues, the kind of gathering Carol would have appreciated, not too large, not too performative, but full of people who genuinely meant what they said. The trouble started on Sunday. Derek and Sandra showed up at the house at 9 in the morning. I was still in my bathrobe, drinking coffee at the kitchen table and staring out the window at the backyard Carol had tended for 35 years. The rose bushes she had planted along the fence were still blooming. I found that unbearable and beautiful at the same time. I heard a key turn in the front door. I had not given my son a key. I want to be clear about that. I had never given him a key to my house. He had apparently made a copy at some point without my knowledge. I would learn later that this was Sandra's idea, but I didn't know that yet. In that moment, I was just a man in his bathrobe watching his son and daughter-in-law walk into his kitchen carrying coffee from a drive-thru, looking around the room with an expression I did not recognize on my son's face. It was the expression of a person who has already decided something. Sandra set her coffee on the counter, Carol's counter, the one she had chosen herself from a salvage yard and refinished by hand, and said, "We were thinking we'd start going through some of Mom's things this week. No point in letting it all sit." I told her I appreciated the thought, but I wasn't ready for that. Derek pulled out a chair, sat down across from me, and said, without any introduction, "Dad, we also wanted to talk to you about the house." I looked at him. I said, "What about the house?" He glanced at Sandra. She gave him a small nod, the kind of nod that told me this conversation had been rehearsed. "It's a lot for one person," he said. "A place this size. The maintenance alone. And you're not getting any younger. Sandra and I have been talking, and we think it might make sense for us to move in and help manage things. You could take the guest room, or we could look at some options. There are some really nice senior communities not too far from here." I sat with that for a moment. I want to say I was shocked, but shock implies you didn't see something coming at all. What I felt was closer to a cold confirmation of something I had been pushing to the back of my mind for a long time. I told him I needed time to think. He said they completely understood. They finished their drive-through coffees at my kitchen table and left an hour later. Sandra took Carol's good serving dish on her way out, claiming she had borrowed it for the funeral reception and was just now remembering to return it. The dish had been in Carol's family since the 1960s. I didn't say anything. Not yet. Over the next 2 weeks, things accelerated in a way that took my breath away. Derek called every day, sometimes twice. Derek called. The conversations were always cloaked in the language of concern. Worry for my health. Worry about the stairs in the house. Worry about me being alone. But threaded through every call was the same refrain. The house was too big. I was too old to manage it. And the responsible thing would be for me to make a plan. Patrice called once. She spent most of the call crying about her mother, which I understood. But toward the end, she said something that lodged in my chest like a splinter. She said, "Derek says you're going to need some help, Dad. I hope you'll be reasonable." I had not spoken to Derek about anything. I had said I needed time to think. I was 67 years old, in excellent health, still sharp, still active, still the same man who had worked 35 years at that plant and built a life on Clover Hill Road with his own 2 hands. And my children were talking about me like I was a problem to be solved. 3 weeks after Carol's funeral, I was going through her nightstand slowly, on my own time, on my own terms, when I found the envelope. It was a plain white envelope, sealed, with my name written on the front in Carol's handwriting. Just Raymond. Nothing else. It had been tucked underneath her Bible, beneath a photograph of the 2 of us, from our 20th anniversary trip to Savannah, and beside a small brass key I had never seen before. I sat on the edge of our bed for a long time before I opened it. Her letter was 4 pages, handwritten, dated 6 months before her diagnosis. She had not known she was sick when she wrote it. She had simply decided, in the way she decided most important things, that it was time. I will not share every word of that letter here because some of it belongs only to me. She wrote that for the past 23 years, she had been doing something she hoped I would one day understand. She had been building a wall, she said, not between us, but around us, around our life and everything we had made together. She had watched, over the years, what happened to families when one spouse died and the other was left vulnerable. She had watched neighbors lose their homes. She had watched friends get steamrolled by their own children. She had watched the law fail people who never thought they needed a lawyer until it was too late. Carol was not a dramatic woman, but she was a clear-eyed one. She had seen something in the way Derek changed after he married Sandra. She had never said it to me directly because she did not want to damage my relationship with my son. But she saw it, and she prepared. The key, she wrote, belonged to a safe deposit box at First Commerce Bank, East Side Branch, Box 114. I was named as sole authorized holder. The box contained a copy of a legal document she had worked with an estate attorney to prepare and execute. A revocable living trust, updated and finalized 5 years ago. Under the terms of the trust, the house on Clover Hill Road and its contents belonged to the trust. I was named as the sole trustee and sole beneficiary during my lifetime. No other person had any claim to the property, any right of occupancy, or any legal standing to contest decisions I made about it. There were provisions for what would happen after my death, structured in a way that prioritized fairness but left me with full discretion. There were also, she wrote, other accounts, savings she had accumulated quietly over 2 decades through careful management, modest investments, and the proceeds from her mother's estate, which had been more substantial than she had ever let on. She closed the letter by saying she was sorry for keeping it quiet for so long. She said she had told herself she would tell me when the time was right. And somehow, the time had never felt right enough. But she wanted me to know that everything she had done out of love. Not distrust, not secrecy. Love, the kind of love that looks ahead, she wrote, and tries to clear the path before you even know there's a bend in the road. I sat on the edge of that bed until the room went dark. The next morning, I drove to First Commerce Bank. I had not been to that branch in years. The woman at the front desk was courteous and efficient. She confirmed my identity, checked the box records, and walked me to the vault without ceremony. She slid the box out of its slot and left me alone in the small private room with nothing but a table, a chair, and 23 years of my wife's careful work. Everything Carol had described was there. The trust document was there, thick and formal, bearing the seal of a Nashville law firm, and Carol's signature dated 5 years prior. There were 3 savings account statements in her name, with me listed as the transfer on death beneficiary, totaling an amount that made me press my hand flat on the table to keep it steady. There was a separate folder containing the original deed to the house, already titled in the name of the trust. There was a letter from the attorney explaining the terms in plain language, and a business card with the attorney's direct number circled in Carol's pen. There was also a smaller envelope, personal, addressed to me in the same handwriting as the one I had found in the nightstand. I opened it there. In that small room, it said, "Raymond, by now you've probably had some trouble. I'm sorry I couldn't be there. But you have everything you need. You always did. I love you. Carol." I called the attorney the next day. His name was Mr. Hartwell, a soft-spoken man in his early 60s, who had clearly known Carol for a long time and thought very highly of her. He confirmed everything. He walked me through the trust in detail, explained my rights as trustee and beneficiary, and made absolutely clear that the house was mine, the accounts were mine, and no one, no child, no in-law, no well-meaning relative had any legal claim to any of it without my explicit consent. He also told me, with a careful pause before he said it, that Carol had specifically asked him to prepare a simple legal notice I could use if I ever needed to formally communicate to anyone attempting to claim an interest in the property. A cease and desist, essentially, personalized for this exact situation. She had asked for it, he said, about 4 years ago. My wife had prepared a cease and desist letter for my children 4 years before she died. I took it home and put it in my desk drawer. I wasn't ready yet, but I was close. What pushed me over the edge was a Sunday afternoon 3 weeks later. I came home from church to find Derek and Sandra in my driveway with a U-Haul, not at my door. In my driveway, with a U-Haul. Sandra explained, very calmly, that they had decided to get a head start on the transition. They had packed their own furniture into a storage unit to make room and wanted to begin moving some of their things in today. She said it with the tone of someone announcing a plan that has already been decided, not proposed. I stood at the end of my driveway in my church clothes, and I looked at my son. He couldn't quite meet my eyes. He stood with his hands in his pockets and his shoulders slightly forward, the way he used to stand as a teenager when he knew he had done something wrong but was hoping to avoid the conversation. I said, very calmly, "Derek, you are not moving anything into this house today. Or any other day." Sandra started to say something. I raised one hand and she stopped. I told him I needed him to hear something. I told him to come inside without Sandra. Just the two of us. He hesitated. Sandra touched his arm and whispered something. He shook her hand off and followed me inside. I sat him down at the kitchen table, the same table where he had sat 6 weeks earlier, and told me I was too old for my own house, and I put 3 documents in front of him. A copy of the trust, a copy of the deed in the name of the trust, and the cease and desist letter, signed and dated. I told him to read them. He read the first page of the trust, and I watched the color leave his face. He tried several things after that. He tried confusion, maybe there was a misunderstanding. He tried negotiation. Surely we could work something out as a family. He tried, briefly and desperately, a version of wounded feelings, suggesting that Carol would not have wanted this kind of division. I let him try all of it. I listened without interrupting, and when he finished, I said this: "Your mother spent 23 years making sure you could not do to me what you've been trying to do for the past 6 weeks. She loved you anyway. I love you anyway. But this house is mine. This life is mine, and what you and Sandra brought to my driveway today is going back in that truck, and you are going home." He started to cry. I don't say that to be cruel, I say it because it happened, and because I believe some part of him, somewhere underneath everything Sandra had convinced him of, already knew he had gone badly wrong. He sat at my kitchen table and he cried, and I gave him a glass of water and I waited. After a while, he asked me what this meant for us. I told him that was entirely up to him. The door was open, if he was willing to walk through it honestly. If he needed time, I understood. But the conversation about this house was finished, and if Sandra brought another U-Haul to my property, I would be calling both my attorney and the police. He left without Sandra saying another word to me. She sat in the passenger seat of that U-Haul and stared straight ahead as they pulled out of my driveway. Patrice called that evening. Apparently, Derek had called her first. Her voice was shaking, and she asked me if I had really turned on my own children. I told her I had done no such thing. I had simply declined to let my children take my house. I told her that when she was ready to talk about her mother, about the woman Carol actually was, and everything she had built, I was here. Until then, I didn't have much else to say. She hung up. But she called back the next week, and the week after that. Patrice is finding her way back to me. Slowly. I believe she will get there. She is more her mother's child than she knows. Derek and I have not spoken in 4 months. I don't know if we will. I keep the door open, but I don't wait by it. What I do instead is this. I sit in the living room in the evenings, in the chair that faces the window, overlooking Carol's rose bushes, and I think about 23 years of Tuesday mornings. I think about my wife driving to that bank branch, parking her car, walking in, tending that safe deposit box like a garden, feeding it new documents, updating it, keeping it current, doing it quietly, without drama, without asking for credit. Nobody ever knew. Not our children, not our neighbors, not anyone we called friends. Just Carol, alone in a small room with a metal box, making sure that the man she loved would be all right after she was gone. People ask me sometimes, or I imagine them asking whether it hurt me that she kept it from me for so long. I've sat with that question. The answer is no. It doesn't hurt. It humbles me. There is a difference. She knew me well enough to know that if she had told me, I would have protested. I would have told her I didn't need protecting, that I could handle my own affairs, that she didn't need to worry. I would have said all of this with complete confidence and moderate foolishness, the way men of my generation often do. And she would have smiled and nodded and gone back to that bank on the second Tuesday of the next month anyway, because Carol understood something I was still learning at 67 years old. Preparation is not pessimism. It is love with its eyes open. She used to say the house was just a building until you decided to mean it. Until you put something of yourself into it. Your choices, your work, your intention. Then it became something else. Then it became yours in a way that had nothing to do with a deed or a title. I understand what she meant now. I understand it differently than I did when she was alive to say it. The house on Clover Hill Road is mine because she made it so. Yes, but more than that, it is mine because she poured 40 years of love into its walls and left it to me as the final gift of a marriage I did not deserve and cannot stop being grateful for. Some mornings I wake up early, before the light comes all the way in, and for just a few seconds I forget. I reach across the bed the way I have for 41 years, and for those few seconds everything is still as it was. And then I remember. And the grief comes the way it always does. Clean. And total. And mine. But here is what I have found, in the months since I lost her. Grief and gratitude are not opposites. They live in the same place. You cannot love something deeply and not mourn it when it goes. The mourning is only proof of what it was. I am 67 years old. I live alone in a 3-bedroom colonial on Clover Hill Road in Nashville, Tennessee. My rose bushes are blooming. My accounts are in order. My late wife's attorney checks in every few months to make sure everything is properly maintained. And sometimes we sit in my kitchen and he tells me stories about Carol from the years they worked together, and I learn things about her I never knew. And I love her for them. I am not weak. I was never weak. I just had a fortress I didn't know I was living inside of. She built it for me, brick by brick, Tuesday by Tuesday. For 23 years, that's the kind of woman she was. And no one, not my son, not his wife, not anyone with a U-Haul and an appetite for what doesn't belong to them will ever be able to touch it. Not now. Not ever. If you're watching this and you have someone like that in your life, someone who loves you quietly, who prepares without asking for praise, who builds walls around you while you're busy looking at the horizon, please turn around and look. You might be more protected than you know. And if you're watching this and you've lost that person, the way I have, I want you to know that the protection doesn't end. It stays. It was built to last, like a good house always is. If this story meant something to you, please hit the like button and subscribe to Revenge Accounts. There are more stories like this one. Stories about ordinary people who found extraordinary strength, sometimes their own, and sometimes the kind that was left behind for them by someone who loved them enough to plan ahead. I'll see you in the next one.